On today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, how can the Houston Texans dominate the Colts? Well, for me, guys, it starts up front with the big boys in the trenches. We talk about that and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers across the nation, across the great state of Texas, and specifically here in H-Town to this Wednesday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you to all of our first-time listeners and viewers. Come on in, sit down. Do us three favors: subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. And also, as always, shout out to our everydayers from the Himalayas. We really appreciate you guys always coming by, listening, watching the Locked On Texans podcast. Y'all know who we are. John, some sports guy Hickman, your Texas football analyst on the other side of the screen. Throwing it way over there to my man, Cody Davis, Texans Credential Media member. Detroit News is on. Today's episode, I think we're going to look at how the Houston Texans can really maximize their talents, their team, to get a win to start off week one. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Cody, take us away.
And on this Wednesday installment of Locked On Texans, John and I will be talking about the team captains for the 2024 season. And we also going to continue a conversation that we started on yesterday's show by looking at expectations and players who can be X factors on both sides of the ball. But John, Sunday, week one, the big day, the Houston Texans will finally kick off arguably, if not their most anticipated season in franchise history. The 2024 campaign will start off in Indianapolis, where they ended the 2023 regular season with a victory against the Indianapolis Colts. Because the one thing I love about the Houston Texans and Indianapolis Colts, man, these two teams basically mirror each other a lot. I think the only upper hand that the Houston Texans have is the fact that the Texans, their young quarterback, has already ran through a full season. The Colts' young quarterback, I still believe in him. I know he did not look good in preseason, but I still believe in Anthony Richardson. But we got to keep it to the reality of the situation, and that is literally him being part of his rookie season 2.0 at this point. But I do believe the Colts and Texans will give us a really good week one contest. And John, we got to talk about not only how the Houston Texans can win, but how they can dominate the Indianapolis Colts on Sunday. And for me, it starts with the run game. When you look at the Indianapolis Colts, and let me preface my statement by saying this, I understand that the Colts have made moves throughout the offseason, especially on the defensive side of the ball, to help improve their defense. And I do understand that the Colts did have to go through some injury woes. However, this is a Colts team that gave up an average of 123 yards on the ground last year, and they finished the season ranked 24. Their run defense was not that good. And when I look at the Houston Texans, I think to myself, this is why you go out and be aggressive and try to sign Saquon Barkley. This is why you go out and be aggressive and trade for Joe Mixon. This is why a lot of people, including you and I here on this show, was excited when the Houston Texans had an opportunity to trade for Joe Mixon. I'm not about to sit up here and say that Joe Mixon is in a category of a Christian McCaffrey or a Jonathan Taylor and put him on a pedestal as, a running back that's in consideration for best in the league. But the one thing that I always love about Joe Mixon, this is a young man who has always been productive in his role. I believe he is entering his 8th season in the league, and out of those 8 seasons, 6 ended with him finishing the regular season with over 1,000 1,000 rushing yards. Even when you take a look at last year, when everybody was sitting there looking at Joe Mixon saying to themselves, man, Joe Mixon, it seemed like he has taken a step back. For some reason, Joe Mixon don't seem like the running back that everybody loved in Cincinnati. He still had an opportunity to finish the regular season with over 1,000 rushing yards. And I look at it from a standpoint, this will be the perfect game for not only the Houston Texans to showcase why they traded for Joe Mixon, but it's also a game to showcase why Joe Mixon said when he was asked during training camp, hey, you're getting up there in age. You're knocking on the door of 30. This is normally when we start seeing running backs decline. Do you have any concern that you cannot be the same productive running back that we saw in Cincy? This is the type of game where Joe Mixon could showcase that he still has something in the tank. Now, John, I'm sitting here talking about the Houston Texans dominating a rushing attack, but I'm pretty sure your point of emphasis probably go hand in hand with whether or not Joe Mixon is going to have an opportunity to succeed.
Absolutely. And let me say this, guys. And if you ask me, guys, what does a dominant game for the Texans look like? I'm going to tell you, it looks like winning the trenches up front. Look, I get it. This Colts team isn't going to the playoffs. They're not a divisional game away. They don't have real Super Bowl aspirations and expectations, excuse me. But the fact remains is Houston needs both Kenyon Green and Juice Scruggs to get to the next level in their game. And to do that, they need this first game to dominate against Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner. Grover Stewart missed 6 games last year due to suspension. So maybe that played a role in this Colts team not being able to stop the run consistently like they wanted to. And I do believe that once Grover Stewart came back, they got better at being able to stop the run. But those are 2 great interior defensive linemen, and that's 2 great challenges for the young left guard and center duo. D'Amico Ryans gave those 2 guys some praises that we talked about yesterday's show. So I think it starts up front, giving Houston the chance to be successful in the ground game for Joe Mixon. First year for the Houston Texans to have a player like Joe Mixon, giving Houston the protection that they need for C.J. Stroud. And look, with the ground game, despite the carries from Dameon Pierce, Houston ran the ball pretty well in the preseason, aside from the Pittsburgh Steelers game as well. Against the Giants, they ran for over 100 yards, and 3 backs ran for 4 more yards per carry. Same with the preseason finale against the Rams. And it's not just about establishing the run game again, but making sure that those 2 guys, that young duo in Kenyon Green and Juice Scruggs, who will have their safety valves next to them in the Laramie Tunsil. On the opposite side, Shaq Mason and Titus Howard. They got to provide that protection, for C.J. Stroud. This Colts team registered 51 sacks last year, and they got better in that unit. They added a player who got 13 sacks out of UCLA in Latu. They even got better in terms of getting after the quarterback, but also adding the vet Raekwon Davis. And you're looking at Adebawore going into his 2nd year. So the depth is there, and he had a good rookie year, all things considered. The depth for the Indianapolis Colts is there. So they can throw at you about 7 guys. And for the Houston Texans, it's important for that 7 or 8 guys that they put out on the field to attack this offense. It's important for that front 5 to make sure that they're holding their own. And I think the key to unlocking this great potential that we have for this offensive line is just seeing Kenyon Green get to the next level in his game, along with being healthy, and Juice Scruggs. The camaraderie and chemistry between those 2 is going to be important. The challenge for the Houston Texans offensive line is real, and we got to respect it. Plain and simple. We got to respect the fact that they have between 6 and 7 guys that they can put out on their field and cause disruption, cause pressure. They were not necessarily the best pressure team last year, but when you get 51 total sacks, you're kind of okay with it. Pressure is a point of emphasis for this team this year. Texans got to be better up front. If they're better up front, if they dominate the trenches, then I don't see why they won't dominate the run game. Then I don't see why CJ can't go out there and throw for 270 and 3 TDs, because he has the time to do so. I think that's how they get this offensive flowing. Not only for game 1, but for 18 weeks, 17 games, that offensive line needs to be healthy, and they got to dominate.
You highlighted Kenyon Green. You highlighted Juice Scruggs. I highlighted Joe Mixon. but are any of these guys also X factors on the offensive side of the ball? And who are X factors on the defensive side of the ball? That's what me and John are going to get into on the opposite side of the break.
You guys have heard us talk a lot about FanDuel here on the Locked On Texans podcast. They are America's #1 sports book, but we got a little something different for you today. If you're like some of America and you're having troubles watching football, well, right now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5. And then in return, FanDuel is giving you a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. And the new Locked On NFL is here. Locked On NFL is now 2 shows every day. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso. And then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On experts, local experts, and you get a unprecedented NFL insight 2 times a day. Hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all within 30 minutes. It's all new on Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Make the madman Tyler Rowland and the barbershop talk Tony Wiggins your second listen at the Locked On NFL on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Now Cody is supporting for us to transition over to, as we are talking about, just highlighted 2 of our AFC South friends, Locked On Jags, Locked On Colts. Now we're talking about the Texans versus the Colts. The Texans-Colts is one of 3 divisional games to kick off this NFL week. But we got to talk about X factors, right? We got to talk about, okay, man, who's the guy on what side of the ball that can really help Houston get to the next level? Tank Dell was recently on I Am Athlete.
No, the Pivot.
The Pivot, excuse me. Oh, my bad, Ryan Clark. He was recently on the Pivot podcast, and I really do love what they do in terms of highlighting athletes. But Tank Dell was asked who is the freshest on the field. And he said, I'm going to put me first for sure. Then he said Nico Collins is just plain Jane, right? And even when you're a plain Jane kind of guy, because I think I'm a plain Jane kind of guy, I don't need a lot to go out there and perform. As long as I look good and feel good, I perform good. But even as a plain Jane type of guy, that don't mean you can't be the X factor. And I think Nico Collins is still this team's X factor. Number one, when we look at the Indianapolis Colts last year, I just talked about how they added all that up front, right? But it was up front. This secondary still ain't the greatest in the league. And last year, they allowed 59 plays of 20-plus yards or more during the 2023 NFL season. So, yes, I do believe the biggest X factor for the Houston Texans, and I say this on Twitter all the time. Y'all see me use the Drewski meme. 12 out here. It's Nico Collins. We talk a lot about T.Y. owning the Texans, but last year, Nico Collins averaged 20 yards per catch, 170 yards per game, and caught 16 out of 18 passes against the Indianapolis Colts. Did y'all hear what I just said? He is still this team's X factor. And again, he'll be going up against a Colts defense who really did not add to their secondary. I believe that that's still that team's weakness. If you give Houston that time that they need, again, i.e., this is how they can dominate, to protect CJ, give him time in the pocket, you're going to see CJ link up and hook up with his receivers on the field, whether that be Stephon Diggs, whether that be Tank Dell. And to take it a step further, I don't think Stephon is the vertical threat that he once was. Doesn't mean he's not a dominant player anymore. Not at all. But I think for Houston, that's a blessing in disguise because, Stephon, we don't need you to go deep. We don't need for you to be a big play down the field type of receiver because we have a man who averaged 16 yards per catch last year. That was throughout the entire year. Just gave you guys the numbers against the Indianapolis Colts, and it seems like when he played them last year, he took it personally. I think Tank did. I think Nico Collins is this team's offensive X factor.
I agree with you, but I think the Colts will definitely. Nico is going to be at the top of their scouting report come Sunday. They remember what Nico did. You know, I know the last 2 days I've been talking about how if it wasn't for one big mistake, Jonathan Taylor probably would have single-handedly beaten the Houston Texans. But Nico Collins, of course, he had help from Seven, but Nico Collins basically single-handedly beat the Indianapolis Colts last year. But John, I'm going to stay in the wide receiving core myself, and I think the biggest X factor for not just Sunday game, but the entire season on the offensive side of the ball and that wide receiving core. Look, I know I said I call Tank Dell the biggest X factor in the league because I think he's definitely going to have an opportunity to open things up for this offense because you have a quote-unquote three-headed monster. However, Tank Dell is also going to be at the top of the scouting report as well because even though Tank Dell did not play in the season finale against the Indianapolis Colts on Week 18, they remember what Tank Dell did them second half, Week 2, when we started saying, oh, the Houston Texans got something special. But the reason why I'm saying I'm staying in the wide receiving core, man, I think the biggest X factor is going to be John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson. This is the perfect opportunity for these two guys. And the reason why I say that is because, look, they have a three-headed monster in their wide receiving core. We know who those three are. And every single Sunday, starting against the Indianapolis Colts, Week 1, we're going to see this defense put so much attention on those three guys. However, when John Mechie has an opportunity to take the field, when Xavier Hutchinson has an opportunity to take the field, they're not going to draw that much attention as a Stephon, as a Nico, or as a Tank Dell. And not only are they not going to have an opportunity to draw that much attention, they're going to have an opportunity to be open on several occasions. And John, to your point about the Indianapolis Colts have a weakened secondary, this is a team that gave up damn near 7 yards per pass attempt last season, and I'm expecting that to repeat itself again. So I'm looking at it from a standpoint, look, if you get an opportunity to get John Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson, two guys who are definitely trying to prove and showcase why they made this 53-man roster, two guys going into training camp, you're looking at two guys who were basically considered quote-unquote bubble guys, they're going to have an opportunity to open up this offense even more. And once again, I know it, I get it. This Houston Texans team have some big names and big players, but it's the players like John Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson. Even when I take a look at the running back core, look, Joe Mixon, I just finished raving about him, how he's going to have an opportunity and the perfect opportunity to showcase why the Houston Texans traded for him. However, running back number 2, don't be surprised if Cam Akers go out there and make a name for himself in this game as well, because you know the Houston Texans are going to utilize a 2 running back system. And look, as of right now, we still don't know what's going on with Dameon Pierce. Shout out to Nick Caserio. If you guys had an opportunity to hear it on Sports Radio 16 or did not, Nick Caserio did come out and say, look, Dameon Pierce was going through a lot off the field last year, and that's something that I've alluded to several times on the show, as you guys know. And for Nick Caserio to come out and say that basically put more into like why we saw Dameon Pierce struggle the way we saw him struggle last year. But on that offensive side of the ball, you're talking about the rushing attack. And once again, I just said how the Indianapolis Colts, once again, I understand injuries and the offseason moves that they made probably going to make it a little bit better. They're still going to rush the ball and have a running attack they're going to have to utilize in Indy.
On the defensive side of the ball, my X factor, with no Christian Harris, I'm going to look at 2 guys. Number 1 is the guy that we've been raving about all summer, Azeez Al-Shire. But number 2 is Henry To'o, who will be filling in for Christian Harris. And a lot of people have concerns with Henry's ability to drop back in coverage. I, for one, Cody, whether that was at practice or during a preseason game, I saw an improved effort from Henry. And I also think what's going to help Henry out is the fact that you're going up against a quarterback who, I think Houston could take advantage of Anthony Richardson by throwing some different looks out there to confuse him. But that quarterback, he's going to go through his own personal struggles, and those struggles have nothing to do with whatever the Houston Texans is throwing at him. So for me, I'm looking at Henry and I'm saying to myself, it's kind of like what Michael Irvin did on I think it was Fox or something. What are you going to do about it? Like, for Henry, what are you going to do about the concerns that people have, albeit fair, but the concerns that people have, whether or not he can hold up in that spot while Christian Harris will be out for 4 games. And I think that for me, as an X factor, if he gives Houston what they need, you're going to look at Houston and say, well, Christian Harris can take his time. After those 4 games, you want to see him back, no doubt about it. But that gives Houston a little relief in terms of now we got a player we can trust whenever C. Harris comes back, that we maybe can able to rotate in more often to give whether it's Christian Harris or Azeez a break. So I think the linebacker group for Houston is very important. They're going to be going up against a team that offensive line would be healthy. They have a great running back behind them. They still will have a good running game with Anthony Richardson and his legs and how he uses it. And if you can force some of those quick decisions away from Anthony Richardson, like we talk about Sting, we talk about Kamari, but in reality, going up against Anthony Richardson, if you can take away some of those quick reads, maybe those quick RPOs from Anthony Richardson, and force him to extend the play or hold the ball longer than what he needs to read the field. And then, oh yeah, guys, you got Danielle Hunter who's still playing football. We'll wait to see what's going on with Will Henderson, but that's going to create pressure. And now, again, you're looking at 3rd and 2. Instead of 3rd and 2, now you're looking at 3rd and 9. And I think that's the key for Houston, forcing long conversion downs. If you can do that, and if you can stretch that field out for Anthony Richardson in terms of decision-making that he needs to make quickly, then I think Houston's defense will be able to feast and create turnovers. And again, you're looking at a team that now you're giving Houston's offense some good field to play around with. The playbook can open up, and then they can put points on the board.
I do want to mention this really quick before moving on. I 100% agree with you. Actually, Henry T was literally on my notes in terms of, the biggest X factor on the defensive side of the ball. However, John, the one name that you did say, Azeez, one of the Houston Texans captain in 2024. We're going to highlight those guys. And one in particular, I don't know why people are making a big fuss about, because it was expected.
Passion, drive, patience. The same winning formula for championships is what keeps your number one ride or die alive. With eBay Motors, they have everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. What you want, a supercharger? The roof rack? Are you looking for exhaust kits or some LED headlights? Whatever you're into, whether it's speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guarantee Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP of the road and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. We got to talk about the 2024 Texans team captains. And I think it's more external than it is internal.
Of course.
For any of the noise that's being made. So, Cody, I'm going to let you take it away.
Yeah, and your captains for the 2024 season, as expected, Laramie Tunsil, CJ Will, Jimmy Ward, John Weeks. Shout out to John Weeks, man. Hey, all the listeners and viewers out there, find you somebody that's going to be with you and love you through hell and hot water like John Weeks and the Houston Texans, man. He has seen both the good and bad. And
with John Weeks' career as a Houston Texan, you talk about loving him through high water, bad and good. It's like my man at the end of the roads. Baby, I know that was you stepped out and cheated on me. But baby, I'll come back. Come back, baby. John Weeks is gonna be a Texan. I wouldn't be surprised if he is not one of the Ring of Honors for the Houston Texans. I mean, he's been here through the good, bad, and the absolute ugly.
He needs to be, man. So shout out to John Weeks, and of course, you got Azeez, and then to round out team captain, Stephon Diggs. Look, John, I'm not about to go through this entire season. I am so sick of people, especially them people up there in Buffalo, talking down on Stephon Diggs' name. Any little small thing, they always got something that's what? Stephon Diggs. Wasn't he a captain the 4 years he was there every single year in Buffalo? And not only that, this isn't a title that they just gave to Stephon. No, We literally watched this man every single day in training camp when we was there. We've been told time and time again, the players on both sides of the ball, I want to say, the coaches on both sides of the ball always talk about how Stephon Diggs is a coach to these players, especially these young guys. I'm already sick of the Stephon Diggs slander. I don't care if he end up being a bust here in the city of Houston. I don't care within the 1 year he finally helped this team get to the mountain in February 2025 in New Orleans. We all celebrate eating beignets and stuff inside the Superdome and everything else. Y'all can finally see me second line, and I don't care where I'm at. Matter of fact, I don't give a damn where I'm at. I'm covering that game. But let me just say this. Stephon Diggs is not a detriment to any organization.
I mean, when you look at John Mechie, you look at John Mechie scoring that touchdown. Look at the sideline.
Exactly.
And that's not a one-time occurring thing. You look at Xavier Hutchinson making big plays. Look at the sideline.
Exactly.
You look at You look at Tank Dell scoring a touchdown. Look at the steal shot of Tank Dell scoring that touchdown.
Why he's on the field?
What do you see? You see Nico Collins with a catch. What do you see? You see Diggs.
It's and I get it, man. Look, I understand last year was a lot going on that entire season, and then if you keep it a buck, outside his first season, you can honestly say Stephon Diggs' time in Buffalo, it was a disappointment because they didn't even get to the Super Bowl, and it's because of that dynasty that's brewing in Kansas City. I get it. I hate to say it too, but I'm telling, like, if there's any Texans fans who still have some type of concern about having Stephon Diggs here in the city of Houston, you have nothing to be concerned and scared about. That young man has literally, he has blown my mind in the time that I've been around him. John, I know you can say the same. Pretty sure probably later on in the week or next week, we'll probably have Sarge back on the show. We'll have B. Scott, Jonathan. Like, Stephon Diggs, man, is literally a coach to a lot of these young players. He is still dominant. There's times where I'm looking and say, hey, Stephon Diggs is still that guy. And the Houston Texans are very fortunate and blessed to have a guy like him here on their franchise, man. Shout out to Stephon. He deserved being team captain.
And I think that's what he is. I think culture matters. I think, I'm not saying Buffalo had a bad culture. I don't know what Buffalo's culture was, but I know the culture here in Houston. And I do know that, okay, you look at Buffalo, they lost their offensive coordinator. They had to fire one midway through the season. It was talks about whether or not the head coach was going to get fired. And when you come to Houston, you look at Houston, albeit, 2 seasons ago that wasn't the case, but there's stability here. There's leaders throughout the locker room. And again, I don't know what's going on in Buffalo in their locker room. But I do know Stephon said that he was in the worst mental headspace of his career with the Bills last season. Said that last year I was in the worst mental space I've been in since I've been in the league. So that's when things had to start shaking out. And he also added that, both the Vikings and the Bills didn't want to necessarily get rid of him, that it was his decision to leave. So for Stephon, maybe just being in a fresher place, a culture that maybe more suitable to the type of player you are. A lot of people look at him and say diva, 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 diva. I tell you what, name one diva that you ain't want to, put a ring on. Name one. Tyra Banks, diva. I tell you what, if you had an opportunity to marry, you would. It may not even necessarily be marriage, but I tell you what, if you had an opportunity to, do what you need to do, right, you're going to do that with a diva. So you take the chances with a diva. You look at diva receivers throughout the NFL history. Which one of those divas would you not rather take on your team? Would you rather have a T.O. or would you rather have somebody that, maybe their best year was 500 yards? So he's a leader. He's passionate. He's a football player. And I think that Houston has football players that could relate. And also, he's a grown man, but kind of check it too. Hey, man, we from the coach on down. And that speaks to the coach. Again, I don't know what's going on in Buffalo. Not to say I don't care, but Houston is different. The weather is different. The city is different. Ain't no state taxes down here. Our gas is cheaper. It ain't cold. Ye may got buffalo wings, but we got Timmy Chan. It's just a different feel. And it matters. And he's a team captain because he leads vocally and on the field. We walk it like he talk it. He's a team captain, well deserved. Thank y'all for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, give me a follow on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, it's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.